Is this book the cure for feeling like a failure? This week, we're going to find out together. The idea for this experiment came from this book called The Novel Cure, and what it is a list of ailments with books as recommendations for those ailments. And for failure, they recommend The History of Mr. Polly by H.G. Wells. So this week we're gonna read The History of Mr. Polly, and I will let you know if I think it is the cure for feeling like a failure. And if I don't think that it is, I'm gonna recommend you some other books that I think might also help you get there. I wanna first get started reading this, get about 20-25% into it, and then we'll see what the Novel Cure has to say about it. So without further ado, let's get started reading. I've gotten about 25% into The History of Mr. Polly, and not much has happened, which I think is kind of the point. We're following this man. We start out as he's kind of sitting on this stile in his town, feeling like he is stuck in life and he suffers from extreme indigestion and he doesn't like his wife and he's just generally a very grumpy middle-aged man. And then what happens is we go back to the beginning of his life and start to kind of follow him throughout his life. A quarter way through the book, we've seen how he was kind of apathetic towards school, had some meaningful friendships and his job, lost touch with some of those friends, and is now kind of just bouncing around from job to job and is not really liking anything that he's doing, just kind of floating through life, if you will. Now his father has just died, and from the synopsis that we get in The Novel Cure, it seems that this is kind of going to be the jumping off point for the rest of this book. I'm not gonna read you all of the blurb that's listed in here because I do think that this is quite an interesting book, and I would encourage you to go out and purchase it on your own and see all of the different ailments and books recommended for them, but I do want to share a couple of snippets from this. Your past is littered with abandoned enterprises. Everything you touch turns to lead. Your very anticipation of failure is self-fulfilling, although your fear of failure means that sometimes you don't even begin. You walk with your head hung low, your shoulders slumping. You're the embodiment of non-success. If we've just painted a picture of you, it's time to meet H.G. Wells's most charming creation, the unsuccessful Mr. Polly. And he is very charming. He mixes up words all the time. He has this very large vocabulary that he uses incorrectly, and it is quite charming. And I am very interested to see what's going to happen from this point onwards. I will say the blurbs, the synopses in here do pretty much give away the entire book. So if you don't want spoilers, and you want to try this for yourself and use a novel to cure what ails you, I would almost recommend looking up your ailment, reading the book, and then reading the synopsis after. But if you don't mind being spoiled on the general synopsis, a lot of these I think are classics, so you may have already heard what happens in them. Anyways, just wanted to point that out. I'm gonna keep reading and I will let y'all know when I have reached the halfway mark, and we will check in again and see if this book is actually going to cure the feeling of being a failure, because right now, I'm not really seeing it, but I am enjoying my time reading the book, so not all hope is lost. I'm now almost 3/4 of the way through this book, and so far, what has happened since we last spoken is Mr. Polly has gotten married somewhat unintentionally, somewhat accidentally. He seems to have kind of fallen into this relationship with his cousin, question mark? He inherits some money after his father dies. He gets a bicycle and is kind of just like riding his bicycle around, feeling a little aimless. There's this girl that he kind of has a crush on and really likes, and he just keeps going back to his cousin because that girl rejects him. He's got like 3 female cousins. He kind of almost proposes to 2 of them. It's a very weird situation. And then surprise, he doesn't like his life. He owns this shop. He's not making money with this shop. And he's really struggling at this point. He spent 15 years trying to make this shop work, and it is not working. He is bankrupt. He gets into a fight with his neighbor. His wife is really mad at him. He decides that his life is over, basically. And so he decides that he's going to end his life. He's attempted to end his life, and he has not succeeded. It's kind of the foil to the way that he got engaged and married. He kind of fell into that, whereas this, he meticulously planned and still was not successful. This is, I think, the turning point in the story where Mr. Polly is going to go do something with his life now that he has spent 15 years really struggling with this. And I'm struggling with this book a little bit. Obviously, I don't know how this ends yet, but I'm assuming he's going to leave his wife. I'm assuming he's going to leave this shop. I'll be really interested to see what the message of this is. at this point feels like the message is, even if you hate your life, you can always abandon all of it and start over. I don't know if that's the right message. So I'll keep you updated on the direction that this goes, but I already have a couple of books in mind that I think I much prefer to this one in terms of looking at feeling like a failure and regret, and even this idea of wanting to end your life and choosing not to. So the gears are turning, and I will let you know when I have finished the book. I have finished reading the history of Mr. Polly, which means we can finally answer the question, is this book the cure for feeling like a failure? And my answer is no. This book as a whole, I think, is fine. We are not in this super macro conflict. It's micro conflicts. We're following the life of one man and the choices that he makes or doesn't make and the consequences on his life. There are some big things that happen, like this fire that he starts that really ruins a lot of the businesses in his town. He starts this fire because he wants to end his life, and he wants his wife to get this insurance money from both the fire insurance and from his life insurance. He starts this fire, he doesn't end his life, and all of the houses, all of the businesses on his street end up burning because the firehouse, I think, is right next to him and it burns as well. He does end up saving this elderly woman from this fire, and therefore he has zero consequences for his actions. Because he saved this one woman from the fire that he himself set, suddenly everyone thinks he's a hero and he has zero consequences for what he has done. Everyone almost is happy about the fire because they all have fire insurance. They're getting all the money out of their shops, these failing shops that they were losing money on, and they're suddenly able to get all that money out of it and like go do something else with their lives. I think the book is trying to poke fun at Mr. Polly. It's trying to poke fun at Mr. Polly. It's trying to poke fun at all of these other people who find themselves trapped in this life that they themselves chose without a lot of thought to it. At least that's how I choose to interpret it. I don't think that H.G. Wells was like, yes, Mr. Polly is a fantastic man and this is the life we should all strive for, because in the end, he is able to get everything he wants. He's able to get rid of all of his responsibilities, including his wife, and leave her and go to this town by the sea, meet this woman who runs this inn, and he has a really happy life there. There's this guy who threatens that, and he ends up dying. Mr. Polly like tries to chase him off, but he's not able to do that. By some turn of events, this man ends up being mistaken for Mr. Polly, so his wife thinks that he's died. She ends up getting that life insurance money and goes and starts a successful shop, a tea shop, with that money, and so she doesn't even want him to come back. So he goes back because he feels guilty. He goes back after he has this perfect life. He goes back to his wife. She thinks she's seen a ghost because she thinks that he's dead, because this other guy that was an issue for Mr. Polly and his new woman, I guess, stole Mr. Polly's clothes and ends up in the river in his clothes, and so they think that it's Mr. Polly. And he's basically like, no, you've seen a ghost. Obviously, you're very happy here without me, and I'll never come back, and you can do whatever you want with your life. Because it's been 5 years. He left her for 5 years. So he kind of gets to go and start this new life over. I think if you read this at face value, it would almost seem like, oh, it doesn't really matter what you do. You can have this life that you just let happen to you, and then you'll still be able to get everything that you want. If you leave all of your responsibilities, don't worry about it, everything will work out in the end. You can just leave all of this. I really hope that's not what this book is trying to say. He just kind of lets life happen to him in all of these different ways, and it's only until the very end of the book that he actually makes some decisions, but it's still never off of his own merits and his own hard work. It's off of like other outside factors, like just making things happen the way that they need to happen. The book itself, I think, was fine. I'd give it like 3 stars. It was enjoyable to exist in, but I feel like I'm gonna forget about this immediately. I never really felt like I wanted to pick it up. I wasn't like dying to know what was gonna happen next, and I wasn't super connected to any of the characters. Mr. Polly is, you kind of have to love him because he is so annoying and kind of stupid at times. I don't think he's a good man. I think he made some bad choices, and none of the other characters in the book I really felt connected to. I really did not like the way that he messed up a lot of things for a lot of people, including his wife and this fire that he started. And everyone was just like really happy for him. And we never, like Miriam never, his wife never tried to find him. I don't know. It seemed in his mind that he could leave her some money and that's the only thing that she needed. And it also felt like she, when he came back, was only concerned about the money. She wasn't a very likable character because even though at the beginning it felt like she really liked him and wanted him to marry her, their relationship, it never really felt like she actually liked him all that much and he never liked her all that much. And so the relationship was purely kind of a financial one, which was interesting. I almost forgot to include some quotes that I saved from this and I want to share them with you quick before we finish this up. Mr. Polly has like 2 paragraphs where he says some pretty profound things and I want to share them with you. So he's talking to this woman, this new woman that he's with at this inn, and he says, one seems to start in life expecting something and it doesn't happen and it doesn't matter. One starts with ideas that things are good and things are bad, and it hasn't much relation to what is good and what is bad. I've always been the skeptitious sort, and it's always seemed rot to me to pretend we know good from evil. Which I think is a pretty profound thing for Mr. Polly to say. That is kind of how his life is going. But to be completely honest, I kind of feel like it's his fault. Like, he never decides to do anything. He just lets life happen to him and he just falls into marriage and owning a business. Like, these really big life decisions, he doesn't really think about them all that much. And he doesn't really decide to do them. He just lets them happen. Which he also kind of calls himself out for. He says, most of the time I've been half dreaming. I married like a dream almost. I've never really planned my life or set out to live. I happened, things happened to me. But then he gives himself an excuse and he says it's so with everyone. And I think to an extent, life happens to us. We also have the capability to make decisions about things, and saying that, ooh, my life would have ended up this way even if I had made different decisions, I think is incorrect. And especially with things that you do have some control over, like your occupation and your relationship. You should never be falling into those things. Obviously, sometimes, especially with work, you need to work a job that you don't really love in order to put food on the table. But this idea that our situation is so set in stone that there's not really anything that we can do about it, I think is incorrect. And I think really that's my central problem with this book, is that Mr. Polly seems to believe that life just happens to him and there was nothing he could have done to change it, when in fact, he had several moments where he could have stood up for what he wanted and said no to things and said yes to other things and lived a more fulfilling life for him. He didn't have to fall into this marriage or this job. He could have made different choices. Ultimately, I think that's why he failed, is because he failed to make a decision. He just kind of let things happen to him. So let's talk about some books that I think answer this question much better. My absolute number one recommendation is The Midnight Library. This is exactly this book, but done better, in my opinion. It does kind of hit you over the head with the fact that, hey, I'm trying to stop you from feeling like a failure. I'm trying to change the way that you think about regret, but it really worked for me. I gave it 5 stars. It's the story of this woman who ends up wanting to take her own life and goes to this midnight library where she's able to kind of experience past lives where she had made a different decision and go down that rabbit hole and see what her life would have looked like. And it completely changed the way that I think about regret. I think it is absolutely the cure for feeling like a failure. The history of Mr. Polly reminded me of a lot of Japanese literature that I've read, like The Forest of Wool and Steel, which I'm still reading, which is one man who is a piano tuner trying to figure out how to be successful in that, and he's not being super successful, and he has a love for the art, but it's very mundane and slow, and he's just trying to figure out how to succeed. How Do You Live is another great one. This book also changed the way that I think about regret, and so I really wanted to include it in this section because I think The Midnight Library plus How Do You Live really have formed the way that I think about failure and regret nowadays, and I think both of those together are a really good mix of perspectives on the same issue. How Do You Live is the story of this young boy who is growing up and has questions about how do you be a good person, and so we're kind of following his life and his uncle's writing him these letters and they're having these conversations about what's going on with him in school and in life, and his mother chimes in sometimes as well. And it's just a really well done combination of conversations about how to be a good person, and regret is discussed in one of them. And I think it does a really good job of showing you the purpose of the feeling of feeling like a failure, because sometimes we do fail at things and that feeling has a purpose too. Some more Japanese literature that I love. Lonely Castle in the Mirror is a bunch of school children who are failing at fitting in basically, and they all end up at this magical castle. They need to find this key to be granted a wish, but it's not really about the key or the wish. It's more about these children finding out the connection that they have to each other, finding out what's going on with this castle, where it came from, why it's there. Really, it's about them exploring why they don't fit in and how to overcome that through connection. So if you're feeling like a failure at social situations, I think this one's a really good one. And then I also have to mention Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This book gets a little wild. If you've read anything by Sayaka Murata, you know what I'm talking about, but she really likes to kind of go off the rails with her books, and this one is probably the most tame of her books. Earthlings really gets crazy, but this one is the story of a woman who works in a convenience store and society is giving her pressure. Society is telling her that she's a failure because she works in this convenience store and she's not married, and they're telling her that these are the things that she needs to do to be a success. And so this one, and also possibly There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job. I think if society is giving you pressure and making you feel like a failure, this might be a good one for you to read, especially if you're neurodivergent. This book is very neurodivergent coded. If you're feeling a pressure to fit into a certain mold, because our main character is happy. She likes working in the convenience store. It's really fulfilling for her. And society is telling her that that's not what she should be doing. And I think this is a good one to read if you're feeling that and you want permission to do what you want to do, if that makes sense. The last thing I'll recommend is The Alchemist. And this is kind of a different story. It's more along the lines of finding your purpose. And I have so many different book recommendations for that ailment, feeling like you have no purpose in life. But I think The Alchemist works quite well in this realm if you're looking for a story about finding purpose and following your personal legend, as the book says, that also does deal with failure. Because I feel like so often when we're talking about finding purpose, the conversations are about, well, if it's what you should be doing, it'll be easy. And that's just not always the case. I think this one does the everything happens for a reason well. Every single time I read this book, I go, my brain's too big for this. Like, I've evolved past this. Like, I don't need this lesson. Like, this is too hit you over the head with it. This is too obvious. I don't need to read this book. I've read it 3 or 4 times now, and every single time I get something new out of it, and I really highly recommend it. We're following this boy, and he is trying to follow his personal legend. It's a little magical. Everything happens for a reason in it, and he succeeds and he fails and he goes on this long journey. And I really love the way that this is set up to tell you to slow down and enjoy the moment, and also continuously be pushing and deciding to move your life along regardless of what happens to you, in order to do what you need to do to live a happy, fulfilled life. And because of the journey our main character goes on, I think it does tie into this regret failure situation as well. So those are all of my recommendations for feeling like a failure. If you have any other books that you want to recommend to us in the comments, please do, because I'm sure there are many more out there that I personally have not read yet, and I would love to pick up some more of them. So let me know in the comments what your favorite books are for curing the feeling of feeling like a failure. And that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I think I'm gonna make this into a series because there are lots of other entries in the novel cure that I would like to explore and read more books. So let me know if you have an ailment that you'd like me to cover next, leave it in the comments, and I will read the book and we will find out together if it is the cure, and if it's not, I'll give you some more recommendations just like we did this time. If you're new to my channel, I would love for you to stick around and subscribe and join our little community here. Otherwise, I will see you all next week. I'm posting every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, so I will see you then. Bye!